This morning, we're going to continue this series on leadership pain. And I want to encourage you. There are racks. There's a card in the rack in front of you. You can pick one of those cards and you want to take some notes. There's something you hear today that you want to write down, and maybe you think it might come in handy in the week that you're going to face that's coming up. I want to encourage you to do that. There's a man by the name of Evan Almondo, and he gives a synopsis of one of my family's all-time favorite movies. And that movie is called Remember the Titans. And it's a high school football team, and they're forced to integrate the team. And it brings together players from different racial backgrounds. Coach Boone is played by Denzel Washington. And he takes charge of the team. They overcome all these challenges. They work together. And amidst those challenges and resistance, the players learn how to respect and support one another. And through their hard work, their determination, they eventually become like this united team. They overcome prejudice. They achieve success on the football field. And the movie shows how sports can bring people together and promotes understanding even in the face of adversity. Here's what happens in one scene in particular. There's a player on the team by the name of Ray Buds who is intentionally missing blocks during training camp and the season. Now, if you don't know sports, one of the worst things you can do as a football player is miss your block, okay? You miss your block, somebody gets tackled or somebody gets hurt. That's not good. So he's intentionally doing this. But All-American and team captain, Jerry Bertier, he observes this and he talks with Coach Herman Boone in the locker room after practice. And their conversation goes something like this. Bertier, Coach, could I speak with you in private? Coach Boone, sure. What's on your mind, son? Bertier, I want Ray off the team, Coach. Coach Boone, I mean, you know my policy, Jerry. Bertier, yes, I do, and I respect it, but I know that Ray missed that block on purpose. Sometimes you've just got to cut a man loose. Coach Boone, well, you're the captain. You make a decision, but you support your decision. Cut to the next scene while Jerry waits for Ray to exit the locker room after practice. Bertier, he's standing outside of the locker room and he says, Ray, you're out. Ray Bud says, what? Jerry says, I'm not going to let you play for this team anymore. Ray says, oh yeah, Jerry Lewis, going to go tell Coach Kuhn what to do just like last time? But then that's right. He is your daddy, isn't he? Boone don't cut anybody. Remember, Jerry? Bertier, I had you cut, Ray. Ray Bud says, you're just willing to throw our friendship away for them? Ray Bud says, you can keep them. And he storms out. That is leadership. Leadership pain personified. As your reminder, I've shared in the past that whenever you lead, it'll produce growth and change. And that change will lead to loss, and that loss will lead to pain. Consequently, as Sam Chan has said, growth equals pain, and therefore leadership is pain. Today I want to take a moment to observe, to marvel, to grow in our appreciation for one of the most significant leaders in all of the Old Testament, Queen Esther. Queen Esther's conversation with King Xerxes, or as some translations say, Ahasuerus, in the book of Esther, is the model of what it means to lead by engaging in incredibly difficult, painful, and consequential conversations. Her example is one for all of us to follow. Now, let me just take a bit of a time out here before we go any further. I want you to know this morning that I'm going to be reading significant portions of Scripture, but that's because the Scripture itself is an incredible narration of this story. So if you've got a Bible on your phone that you like to use, or if you got a Bible in front of you, get it, turn to Esther, because we're going to be looking at some pretty significant chunks. So just so you're aware of that, all right? Well, here's the first thing, though, as we talk about Esther. It says Esther she's prepared. She's positioned and she's prepared. In the first chapter of the book of Esther, after King Xerxes, he's conquered the nations, the world at that time, and it stretched from Africa to what is modern-day India. And King Xerxes is embarrassed in front of his entire court officials by Queen Vashti's refusal to obey his command. Here's what we read in Esther chapter 1, beginning in verse 10. We read these words. On the seventh day, when King Xerxes was in high spirits from wine, he commanded the 7 eunuchs who served him, Mehuman, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, Abdika, Zethar, and Carcass, to bring before him Queen Vashti, wearing her royal crown, in order to display her beauty to the people and nobles, for she was lovely to look at. But when the attendants delivered the king's command, Queen Vashti refused to come. Then the king became furious and burned with anger. See, King Xerxes' leadership is now being tested. He's grappling with the implication of this woman Vashti's defiance, questioning her understanding of his authority. We read these words. Since it was customary for the king to consult in matters of law and justice, he spoke to the wise men who understood the times, and according to the law, what must be done to Queen Vashti, he asked. She's not obeyed the command of King Xerxes, that the eunuchs have taken her. Then Mehuman replied in the presence of the king and the nobles, Queen Vashti has done wrong, not only against the king, but against the nobles and the peoples of all the provinces of King Xerxes. I just want you to stop for a second. She said no to him. And this guy's saying she said no to everybody because she said no to him. Don't miss that. That's important. For the queen's conduct will become known to all the women, horror of horrors, of all the women, and they will despise their husbands and say, King Xerxes commanded Queen Vashti to be brought before him, but she would not come. This very day, the Persians and Median women of the nobility who have heard about the queen's conduct will respond to all the king's nobles in this way. There will be no end to the disrespect and discord. Therefore, if it pleases the king, let him issue a royal decree. Do you see how fast this has escalated? She said no to him. All of a sudden, the entire kingdom's in danger because someone said no. Someone said no. We don't really know all the reasons why she said no, but she did. And now there is a royal decree going out to the kingdom. All who've heard about the queen's conduct will respond to all the king's nobles in the same way. There will be no end to the disrespect and discord. Therefore, if it pleases the king, let him issue a royal decree. Let it be written in the laws of Persia and Media, which cannot be repealed, that Vashti is never again to enter the presence of King Xerxes. Also, they've got more. Also, let the king give her royal position to someone else who is better than she. Then when the king's edict is proclaimed throughout his vast realm, all the women will respect their husbands from the least to the greatest. The king and his nobles were pleased with this advice, so the king did as Mehuman proposed. He sent dispatches to all parts of the kingdom. to each province in its own script, to each people in their own language, proclaiming that every man should be ruler over his household using his native tongue. Now, the thing about this is that one person said no to one person. All of a sudden, it's become a problem for the entire kingdom. Because one person, for reasons that, if you dig into the text a little bit, she probably had a pretty good reason for saying, no, I'm not coming to see you. Because in all likelihood, well, the text doesn't say it. If you read a little bit closer into the history, what King Xerxes probably asked, is that Queen Vashti come appear before him and all of his royal attendants without any clothes on. That's probably what he did. Because he could. Because he was the king. And she said, no, I'm not doing that. Can you believe the gall? She actually said, no, that's indecent. I'm not doing it. And the next thing you know, it's a problem for the entire kingdom. There's much more going on here. Much more. And we find out the much more a little bit later. Because now there was in the citadel of Susa a Jew. The citadel of Susa is the capital city. It's where King Xerxes' court was. This Jew was of the tribe of Benjamin, named Mordecai. He was the son of Yair, the son of Shemi, the son of Kish. He'd been carried into exile from Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, along with those taken captive by Jehoiakim, who was the king of Judah. Mordecai had a cousin named Hadassah, whom he'd brought up because she had neither father nor mother. This young woman was also known as Esther. She had a lovely figure and was beautiful. Mordecai had taken her as his own daughter when his father and mother died. And when the king's edict, his order and edict had been proclaimed, many young women were brought to the citadel of Susa and put under the care of Hegai. Esther also was taken to the king's palace and entrusted to Hegai, who had charge of the harem. This is incredible timing. It's not a coincidence. Esther, after this whirlwind search that goes on throughout the kingdom to replace Vashti. Do you remember where I said the kingdom stretched? From what to what? Do you remember what I said? From where to where? From Africa to India. And they searched through all of that to find the perfect woman for King Xerxes to make his queen. Esther, this young Jewish woman, is placed in the palace of the king. She's about to step into a place and a position that's uniquely suited for her. A key to her preparation and positioning was that she was taken into King Xerxes' harem. She had to await the king's choice to be invited, along with a bunch of other young women from the kingdom. They'd all been summoned to Susa. Esther, immediately, according to the text, if you read, she pleased Hegai, who was the eunuch in charge of the king's harem. And as a result, she got this favorable position in the harem. And Hegai noticed that she had undergone these beauty treatments. She was being served special food. It was probably of a higher quality of the food of the others. Esther was given 7 handmaids to serve her. She had to wait in that harem once she got there up to possibly 12 months before she could even think of being invited into the king's presence. Incredible. This is incredible. Esther clearly possesses both beauty and intelligence. But how would I know that? How would you know that from reading the text? Because Esther kept her Jewish nationality a secret. If you read in verse 20, she didn't disclose it to Hegai, to the handmaids that were serving her, to anyone. She did that because Mordecai had told her not to do it. And she was no fool. Esther wasn't a fool. And her husband, Mordecai, had arrived in the palace, Susa, for a specific purpose. But if you really get into the weeds of this story, it becomes pretty clear that neither Esther nor Mordecai are adhering strictly to the law of Moses at the time. Because according to the law of Moses, Esther was forbidden from marrying someone who wasn't Jewish. Moreover, the law was very clear that Jews were not permitted to have sexual relations with anyone they were not married to. Yet, we read that she was in a harem. Many women are made available to the king, King Xerxes. So he's going to do whatever he pleases. We read this account. But it becomes evident there's much more to the situation than just what we're reading. We quickly discover in succession a few things. King Xerxes, he summons Esther to come to him. And immediately, she wins his favor. He immediately makes her the queen instead of Vashti. And in a snap, he has this grand party. And while you think, oh, okay, well, that's the end of the story, everything's set, the leadership pain that she will endure in the coming chapters of this book, named after her, they'll transform her life and thousands of lives of others. Because whenever you lead, it will produce growth and change. That change will lead to loss, and loss will lead to pain, and thus growth equals pain. Leadership is pain. Leadership is pain. It becomes pretty evident that not only is Esther all these other things, but she is resolute, and Esther is relentless. At this point of the story, there's two critical events that occur. First, Esther's uncle Mordecai, he uncovers a plot to assassinate King Xerxes. It's hatched by two of his guards. He informs his cousin Esther, Queen Esther, who then conveys the information about this assassination plot to King Xerxes. Consequently, those men are executed for treason, which is aligning with the historical context of that time. There's a second thing that happens, though. The second thing is there's another man named Haman. He becomes enraged with Mordecai, Esther's cousin, because Mordecai refuses to bow to Haman as he passes through the city gate every day. And Haman's hatred for this disrespectful Jew, Mordecai, grows progressively. And finally, Haman can't bear it any longer. And he goes to King Xerxes. And he offers to finance a genocidal plot across the kingdom that would cover the kingdom, which goes from where? To India. And he wants to kill every single Jew in the kingdom of Xerxes. Because Mordecai won't bow to him. One man won't bow to him. Kill them all. Then Haman said to King Xerxes, "There's a certain people dispersed among the peoples in your provinces of your kingdom who keep themselves separate." Remember what I said about the law of Moses and certain rules? Haman is aware of the law of Moses. Their customs are different from those of all other people, and they do not obey the king's laws. They don't obey his laws? Where's he picked that up from? Because Mordecai won't bow to him? It's not in the king's best interest to tolerate them. If it pleases the king, let a decree be issued to destroy them, and I will give 10,000 talents of silver to the king's administrator for the royal treasury. Mordecai is offering to finance a genocidal plot that would cover a landmass from Africa to India. So the king took his signet ring from his finger and gave it to Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of the Jews. Keep the money. Keep the money, the king said to Haman, and do with the people as you please. It's a grave situation. It's very grave, but guess who doesn't realize Esther is Jewish? Who do you think has no clue? Haman. Haman doesn't know that Esther's a Jew. Speaking of leadership, it's evident at this point that King Xerxes, he lacks the ability to really lead effectively. It seems that any attempt to delve deeper, provide specific details, establish boundaries, or determine the underlying motives of Haman's murderous plan and request is completely absent from Xerxes' mind. Will there be consequences for his poor leadership? Certainly. But at this point, the real danger lies in the months-long nightmare that Jews across the known world are about to face. However, the word of this genocidal plot reaches Mordecai. As we read in Esther 4, beginning in verse 1, when Mordecai learned of all that had been done, he tore his clothes and he put on sackcloth and ashes and went out into the city wailing loudly and bitterly. But he went only as far as the king's gate because no one clothed in sackcloth was allowed to enter it. In every province to which the edict and the order of the king came, there was great mourning among the Jews with fasting, weeping, and wailing. Many lay in sackcloth and ashes. Mordecai is making plans to see Queen Esther. Even if it's not said in these verses, that's exactly what he's planning on doing. Word of Mordecai's appearance, behavior, and concern about the plans of the plan to kill Jews, it kind of works its way through the court and eventually arrives at the feet of Queen Esther. Mordecai wants her to go talk to the king, Xerxes, and she correctly informs him that if she shows up to talk to the king uninvited, the penalty could be death. And we read these words to Esther, words that Pastor Bryce shared with us this morning a few moments ago from Esther, chapter 4, verse 12. When Esther's words were reported to Mordecai, words about, hey, if I go see him uninvited, he could kill me. When those words make their way back to Mordecai, he sent back this answer. Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. Now, Queen Esther has to decide what to do. She has to make a choice. And everything about the very fate of her people, the Jews, it depends on her decision, on her choice. She must decide if she will have this crucial conversation or not. Is she resolved? Will she have the difficult conversation that she might, under other circumstances, absolutely try to avoid? I love this quote. It's a quote from Dr. King. He says this: the ultimate of a man or woman is not where one stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where one stands at the times of challenge and controversy. And at this moment, something extraordinary occurs. Esther is in fact resolute. She follows through. Esther asked Jews all over the city of Susa to pray, to fast. And she concludes her response in verse 16. She says, and my attendants will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish. This is where Esther's humility, honesty, they break through. She could have simply said, too bad, so sad, but I just get to keep my spot. Don't really know how I'm going to get around the whole I am Jewish too thing, but I'm not going to worry about that. God's Got my back. Good luck to you, and good night, cousin Mordecai. See ya. And Queen Esther at this point, she becomes focused, relentless, in addressing and dealing with this plot against her people. Queen Esther is an unquestionable power in the palace. She's a recognized leader. And she leans into this unique position as the Jewish queen of a pagan nation. And does this. On the third day, Esther put on her royal garments and stood in the inner court of the palace in front of the king's hall. The king was sitting on his royal throne in the hall, facing the entrance. And when he saw the queen Esther standing in the court, he was pleased with her. And he held out to her the gold scepter that was in his hand. So Esther approached it. She touched the tip of that scepter. And then the king said, "What is it, Esther? What's your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it'll be given to you." "If it pleases the king," replied Esther, "let the king, together with Haman, come today to a banquet I've prepared for him." "Bring Haman at once," the king said, "so that we may do what Esther asked." This is just a parenthetical note. Whereas before, he was upset that Vashti didn't ask how high on the way up when he said jump. Sure looks to me like Queen Esther's got the ability over on him where he's asking her how high to jump on the way up. And ultimately, Esther is at a banquet table 2 nights in a row with her would-be genocidal maniac and King Xerxes. And this is what we read in chapter 7. "So the king said, and Haman went to Queen Esther's banquet. And as they were drinking wine on the second day, the king again asked, 'Queen Esther, what is your petition? It'll be given to you. What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it'll be granted.' Then Queen Esther answered, 'If I found favor with you, your majesty, and if it pleases you, grant me my life. This is my petition. And spare my people. This is my request. For I and my people have been sold to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated. If we had merely been sold as male and female slaves, I would have kept quiet, because no such distress would justify disturbing the king.' King Xerxes asked Queen Esther, 'Who is he? Where is he? The man who's dared to do such a thing?' Esther said, 'An adversary? An enemy? This vile Haman.'" The story of Esther, as we finish and conclude it, concludes with Haman's death. Actually, it's a public execution on the very gallows that he had planned to use in his kingdom-wide plan of genocide. And all of this is because Queen Esther said, "I will be the one to go to King Xerxes. I will be the one to have the conversation." A potentially life-ending conversation. One that I'd really rather avoid having. Because that's what leadership is. Leadership is pain. Dr. Evan O'Neill Kane was the chief surgeon of Kane Summit Hospital in New York City and had practiced his particular specialty for 37 years. Dr. Kane was convinced that people should be operated on with simply a well-administered local anesthesia, so the risk of general anesthesia could be bypassed. He was anxious to prove his theory. The problem was finding a guinea pig willing to undergo the knife while conscious. All those he talked to, it seemed, were fearful of their bodies waking up during surgery and feeling the pain of a deep probing scalpel. And finally, he found a subject. And Cain had performed appendectomies thousands of times. So once again, it was the same procedure. So the patient was prepped and brought into the operating room. The local anesthesia was carefully administered, and the surgery began. And as always, Dr. Cain, he cut across the right side of the abdomen and he went in. He then tied off the blood vessels and found the appendix, excised it, and then he sutured up the incision. Remarkably, the patient felt little discomfort. In fact, he was up and about the next afternoon, which is pretty remarkable because this happened in 1921. When people who had appendectomies were typically kept in the hospital for 6, 7, 8 days. It was a milestone in the world of medicine. It was also a display of courage because the patient and the doctor were one and the same. Dr. Cain operated on himself. That's what it means to be a leader. You subject yourself to pain. You do the things that no one else will do. You want to grow? You want to see change? Then that's what you'll do. Hopefully I won't have to cut my side open and do surgery on myself. But if you're going to lead, it's going to involve pain.